Woke crowd disrespected a memorial event. In Veterans, the morning sun cast a soft, golden glow over Memorial Park as the small town gathered to honor its fallen heroes. Rows of chairs faced the granite war memorial, where James Carter, a retired Marine with a weathered face and a sturdy frame, stood clutching a crumpled piece of paper. It was his brother Michael's last letter, a piece of history he only read aloud once a year to remind the community of the sacrifices made by their sons, daughters, fathers, and mothers. This year's ceremony felt particularly heavy for James, as it marked the 20th anniversary of Michael's death in combat. As James adjusted the microphone, a hush fell over the crowd. Families clutched American flags and photos of loved ones, their expressions a mix of grief and pride. Maria Ortiz, a Gold Star mother whose only son, Daniel, had died in Afghanistan, sat in the front row with her hands trembling in her lap. Beside her, veterans in crisp uniforms stood at attention, their chests adorned with medals. Where are you watching this story from? Let us know in the comments. It's incredible to see how far these stories resonate. And if you believe these moments of reflection are important, don't forget to subscribe for more. But the peace of the moment was shattered by the sudden blare of a bullhorn. "Stop glorifying violence." Gasps rippled through the crowd as a group of about 10 young activists marched into the park, their voices loud and accusatory. Led by Amber Collins, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 20s with dyed green hair and a megaphone in hand, the group carried signs with slogans like "No more war propaganda" and "Honor the dead, not the violence." James froze at the microphone, his heart pounding. He watched as Amber's group forced their way to the center of the ceremony, breaking the sacred circle formed by the community. A father holding his daughter's hand pulled her close, shielding her from the disruption. "This is not the time or place," Maria shouted, her voice thick with emotion as she rose from her chair. Her hands clenched into fists, but her words wavered. "This is about honoring the dead. My son's sacrifice." Amber, undeterred, stepped forward and raised her megaphone. "We're not here to disrespect anyone," she said, her tone sharp, "but this ceremony celebrates a system that sends people like your son to die for political gain." The words cut through Maria like a knife. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. James stepped forward, his grip tightening around the microphone. "Enough," he barked, his voice commanding but measured. The crowd turned to him, their eyes pleading for guidance. This day isn't about politics. It's about people, our people, who gave their lives for something greater than themselves. "If you can't respect that, then leave," Amber scoffed, crossing her arms. "Respect? How about respecting the countless innocent lives lost because of wars your people fought?" She gestured toward the veterans, her tone dripping with disdain. A tense silence settled over the park as James stared at her, searching for a response that wouldn't escalate the chaos. Slowly, he unfolded Michael's letter, the words trembling on the page. "My brother wrote this the night before he died," James said, his voice soft but steady. "If you want to understand what today is really about, then listen." Before he could begin reading, Amber's group began chanting, drowning out his voice. "In the cycle of violence, in the glorification of war." Frustration and anger rippled through the crowd. Some veterans began shouting back, while others struggled to maintain their composure. Maria, tears streaming down her face, tried to approach Amber, but another activist blocked her path. "Please," Maria begged, "just let us have this moment." Amber hesitated, her eyes flickering with something almost like regret. But the chants continued. The scene devolved into chaos as local reporters began recording, their cameras zooming in on the confrontation. James stood frozen, the weight of his brother's letter heavy in his hands. He looked out at the crowd, at Maria, at the veterans, at the grieving families, and felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. The morning after the memorial, the town was in turmoil. Newspapers and online blogs were filled with headlines like "Memorial Day Chaos," "Activists clash with veterans," and "Is honoring the fallen outdated?" The event, once a symbol of unity, now stood as a stark reminder of the deep divisions within the community. Veterans, who had long felt the quiet respect of their neighbors, now felt betrayed. Meanwhile, some residents hesitated to take sides, unsure whether to sympathize with the grief-stricken families or the passionate calls for reform by Amber's group. James Carter sat at his kitchen table, his hands gripping his coffee mug as he stared at his phone. Every swipe through his news feed revealed another wave of comments, some supportive, others vicious. "Why are people like this?" he muttered to himself. Emily, his 24-year-old niece, leaned against the doorway with her laptop tucked under one arm. "Because outrage gets clicks, Uncle James," she said with a small shrug. "But you don't have to sit back and take it. You can control the narrative." James frowned. "Control the narrative? I'm not some politician spinning a story. I just want people to understand why that day matters to us." Emily walked over and placed her laptop on the table, showing him a social media page filled with comments. "Look at this. People are fighting about what happened yesterday, but no one's actually talking about what it means to honor the fallen. You could share your side, the real side, online. Let them hear Michael's words." James hesitated. He'd spent his life avoiding the spotlight, content to live in quiet dignity. But the idea of letting his brother's message fade beneath the noise gnawed at him. Meanwhile, across town, Amber Collins sat in the cramped backroom of a coffee shop with her group of activists. A half-dozen faces surrounded her, each looking to her for direction. "We made waves yesterday," one of them said, slamming their fist on the table. "The media's talking about us. We need to keep the pressure on." Amber nodded, but didn't share their enthusiasm. The adrenaline rush of disrupting the event had faded, leaving behind an ache in her chest. She glanced at her phone, where a clip of Maria Ortiz's tearful plea had been retweeted thousands of times. Maria's face haunted her, though she tried to push the guilt away. "Amber," one of her friends prompted, "what's our next move?" Amber set her phone down and forced a confident tone. "We keep showing people why these ceremonies need to evolve. This isn't about disrespecting anyone. It's about exposing the truth." But her words rang hollow, even to her own ears. While Amber wrestled with her unease, social media continued to escalate the conflict. Trolls targeted Maria Ortiz, accusing her of exploiting her son's death for attention. The messages were cruel, calling her a pawn and mocking her grief. Maria, already struggling with the disruption at the memorial, now found herself drowning in a sea of vitriol. At a local diner, James met Maria for breakfast. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from lack of sleep. As they sipped their coffee, Maria confessed, "I thought I'd seen the worst of humanity after Daniel died. But this? People attacking me for loving my son." Her voice cracked, and James reached across the table to take her hand. "They don't know you, Maria," he said gently. "They just want someone to blame. But we can't let their hate drown out the truth. We have to fight back with dignity." Maria managed a weak smile. "You always know what to say, James. I just wish I felt as strong as you sound." "I'm not strong," James admitted, his voice low. "But Michael was, and I owe it to him, and to Daniel, to protect their legacy. I won't let what happened yesterday define us." That evening, back at home, James finally agreed to Emily's idea. With her help, he recorded a video in his living room. Sitting in his Marine Corps jacket, with Michael's letter in hand, he spoke directly to the camera. "My brother Michael wrote this letter the night before he died," James began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "He didn't write about war or politics. He wrote about family, about sacrifice, about love." As James read Michael's words, his voice cracked but didn't falter. Emily filmed every moment, her eyes glistening with tears. Once the video was edited, she uploaded it to social media with the caption, "What Memorial Day really means." Within hours, the video began to gain traction. Comments poured in from veterans, families, and even strangers, thanking James for his heartfelt message. But not everyone was moved. Members of Amber's group retweeted the video with mocking captions, calling it propaganda. Amber watched the video alone in her apartment, her chest tightening as James' words echoed in her mind. For the first time, she felt the weight of the hurt she had caused. But instead of confronting her emotions, She turned her phone off and buried her face in her hands. This morning, Emily's video of James reading Michael's letter had gone viral, surpassing 1 million views. The heartfelt message resonated with viewers across the nation, drawing praise from veterans groups and families who had lost loved ones in service. But the attention wasn't all positive. Amber's group quickly clipped sections of the video, pairing them with captions like "out of touch" and "dismissive" and "old world patriotism ignores systemic violence." James leaned against the kitchen counter, scrolling through the comments on his phone. The vitriol stung, even as he tried to focus on the messages of support. "They're twisting my words, Emily," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. Emily sat at the dining table, typing furiously on her laptop. "Of course they are. That's what happens online. It's about controlling the narrative, remember? But this is bigger than their spin. People are listening to you, Uncle James. That's what matters." As they spoke, an email notification pinged on James' phone. He opened it, his brow furrowing as he read the message from a local news station. "They want me to join a town hall debate," he said, handing the phone to Emily. Emily's eyes widened as she skimmed the email. "A debate? Against Amber?" James nodded. "Apparently, they think it'll bring clarity to the community. But I don't know, Emily. I'm not a debater. I'm just a guy trying to share his story." Emily closed her laptop and looked at him seriously. "Uncle James, you've got something they don't. Authenticity. You don't need to debate to win. You just need to speak your truth. And I'll help you prepare." Over the next few days, Emily coached James on how to navigate the fast-paced world of media and social platforms. She showed him how to identify common debate tactics, counter misinformation, and use his own experiences to connect with people. Though skeptical at first, James began to see the value in her lessons. Meanwhile, Amber's group scrambled to prepare for the town hall. While her public persona remained confident, Amber privately felt the strain. She knew this debate wasn't just about veterans versus activists. It was a battle for public perception. Her group wanted her to double down on their message, but doubts crept in her mind as she replayed James' video. On the evening of the debate, the town hall was packed with spectators and reporters. The tension was palpable as James and Amber took their seats on opposite sides of the stage. The moderator, a seasoned journalist, introduced the event, emphasizing the importance of civil discourse. James spoke first, his voice calm but firm. He painted a picture of the sacrifices made by service members and their families, weaving in stories of loss, resilience, and love. "Honoring the fallen isn't about glorifying war," he said, looking directly at Amber. "It's about remembering the lives they lived and the dreams they gave up so others could have theirs." Amber responded with fiery conviction, arguing that the world couldn't move forward without addressing the root causes of conflict. She criticized the system for perpetuating cycles of violence and called for a reevaluation of what society chooses to honor. "We're not here to disrespect anyone's loss," she said, her voice rising. "We're here to demand better for future generations." The debate reached its emotional peak when James leaned forward and asked, "Amber, have you ever lost someone in service to others? Have you ever known what it feels like to read a letter like the one my brother wrote, knowing it was his goodbye?" Amber froze, her confident facade slipping for a moment. The audience noticed the hesitation, and whispers spread through the crowd. She quickly deflected, saying, "This isn't about personal experiences. It's about systemic issues we all need to confront." But the crack in her composure didn't go unnoticed. After the debate, James walked off stage feeling both drained and relieved. The crowd's applause still rang in his ears as Emily greeted him backstage with a smile. "You did great, Uncle James," she said, squeezing his arm. "You didn't just defend yourself. You made people think." Amber, however, faced a different aftermath. Anonymous messages flooded her social media accounts, mocking her for faltering during the debate. Some accused her of being a hypocrite, while others questioned her motives entirely. She stared at the screen, her chest tightening as the doubts she'd been suppressing bubbled to the surface. Late that night, Emily scrolled through Amber's social media, curious about her opponent's sudden shift in demeanor. Among the hundreds of comments, one caught her attention. It was from an account with no profile picture and a cryptic username, but its message was startling. You should tell them why you really care about this. Or are you still running from the truth? Emily frowned, reading the comment again. It was unlike the others. Less accusatory, more personal. She bookmarked it, a sense of unease creeping over her. James parked his truck outside Maria's modest home, the weight of the past week evident in his heavy steps. The online harassment against Maria had only worsened, with trolls labeling her as manipulative and overly sentimental. When she opened the door, her eyes were red from crying, but she managed a faint smile. "Come on in, James," she said softly, stepping aside. Inside, James noticed a stack of printed messages on the kitchen counter, while comments mixed with a few messages of support. He shook his head. "You shouldn't be reading these," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "I know," Maria replied, her voice trembling. "But it's hard not to. They're questioning Daniel's memory, James. How can people be so cruel?" James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone, Maria. Let's go to the memorial. Maybe sometime there will help us both remember what this is really about." At the memorial, the setting sun bathed the rows of flags and plaques in a warm glow. Maria knelt beside her son's plaque, running her fingers over his name. "I remember when Daniel was 7, she began, her voice soft but steady. He wanted to play soldier like his dad. He'd line up his toy army men on the kitchen table, saluting them one by one. James listened intently, his throat tightening as Maria's memories transported him back to his own childhood with Michael. Tears welled in his eyes as Maria added, "He always said he wanted to protect people. Even as a little boy, that's all he cared about, making sure everyone was safe." James wiped his eyes and said, "Maria, they don't understand what they're attacking. But we do. We'll make sure they can't drown out the truth." While James and Maria found solace at the memorial, Emily sat at her computer, her curiosity about Amber growing. The peculiar comments she'd seen on Amber's social media nagged at her. After hours of searching, she found an old news article buried deep in the archives. It detailed the story of Amber's father, a decorated veteran who had taken his own life after a long battle with PTSD. Emily leaned back in her chair, stunned. The article painted a picture of a man who had given everything for his country, only to be abandoned by the very system he had served. "So that's why she's so angry," Emily murmured to herself, feeling a pang of sympathy despite their opposing sides. Across town, Amber sat in a dimly lit living room with her closest friends. The mood was tense as she confessed, "I don't know if we're doing the right thing anymore. I keep thinking about Maria, about her son. Are we really helping anyone? Or are we just making things worse?" Her friends exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a fiery activist named Derek, crossed his arms and said, "You're the one who's supposed to lead us, Amber. If you can't stay focused, maybe someone else should." The room fell silent as Amber stared at him, the sting of his words cutting deep. "I'm trying," she said quietly. "But this isn't just a cause for me. It's personal." "Maybe that's the problem," Derek retorted. "You're too emotional about all of this. We need strategy, not second-guessing." Amber's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. "I've given everything to this movement," she said, her voice cracking. "Don't question my commitment." The confrontation left Amber feeling isolated, her once unshakable confidence now riddled with doubt. Meanwhile, James took a different approach. He reached out to fellow veterans in the area, sharing his vision for a new memorial event. "This isn't about retaliation," he told them. "It's about unity, showing that we can honor the past while still looking toward the future." The veterans responded with enthusiasm, offering their support and ideas. Plans for the event began to take shape, and James felt a renewed sense of purpose. As the evening wore on, Amber sat alone in her apartment, a shoebox of old photographs resting on her lap. She pulled out a picture of her father in uniform, his face serious yet proud. Tears blurred her vision as memories flooded back. His laughter, his stories, and the shadow that PTSD cast over their family. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I just wanted to make things better." The morning light streamed through Maria's kitchen window as she sat at the table, pen in hand. The events of the past weeks had drained her, but she knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. If they won't listen to James, she thought, maybe they'll listen to a mother. She began to write, her words flowing with raw emotion. She described Daniel as more than a soldier. He was a son, a friend, and a protector. She wrote about the day he enlisted, how proud he'd been to serve, and the agony of losing him. But she didn't stop there. Maria called for understanding, for the kind of dialogue that could heal instead of divide. We don't have to agree on everything, she wrote, but we do have to see each other as human beings. When she finished, she submitted the letter to the local newspaper. By the end of the day, it was published online, accompanied by a picture of Daniel in his uniform. The letter struck a chord, quickly spreading across social media. Messages poured in from people who resonated with Maria's heartfelt plea for empathy. Amber stumbled across the letter during one of her late-night scrolls. At first, she was defensive, expecting more of the same rhetoric she'd been fighting against. But as she read Maria's words, something shifted. The vivid descriptions of Daniel as a boy, his dreams, and his ultimate sacrifice hit her hard. She closed her laptop and sat in silence, her chest tightening with an emotion she couldn't quite name. The next morning, her group convened to discuss the letter. "It's manipulative," Derek declared, slamming his fist on the table. "She's just trying to guilt us into backing down." Amber stayed quiet, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "It's not that simple," she finally said. Derek raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Amber hesitated, unsure how to articulate the storm brewing inside her. I think there's more to this than we've been willing to admit," she said softly. But the others dismissed her, their unwavering certainty leaving her feeling even more isolated. Meanwhile, Emily approached James with a look of determination. "Uncle James, there's something you need to see," she said, handing him a printout of the article she'd found about Amber's father. James read the piece in silence, his face unreadable. When he finished, he placed the paper on the table and leaned back in his chair. "Her father was a veteran," he said, almost to himself. Emily nodded. "It explains a lot, doesn't it? She's not just fighting for her beliefs. She's fighting her own demons." James sighed, the weight of the revelation settling on him. "So, what are you suggesting?" Emily's eyes met his. "Reach out to her, not as an opponent, but as someone who understands loss. If anyone can bridge this divide, it's you." James spent the day reflecting on Maria's letter and Emily's words. He thought about Michael's final letter, the way his brother had written about finding peace even in the midst of war. "Conflict doesn't have to end in hatred," Michael had written. "Sometimes it's about finding a way to forgive." That evening, James attended a meeting with other veterans to finalize plans for a new memorial event. They decided to host a traveling exhibit featuring personal stories of service members, hoping to foster understanding between the community's divided factions. Amber, still grappling with her emotions, learned about the exhibit and decided to attend alone. The moment she stepped into the dimly lit hall, she was struck by the sheer magnitude of the stories on display. Photos, letters, and artifacts lined the walls, each telling a unique tale of sacrifice and resilience. As she walked through the exhibit, Amber's composure began to crumble. One story featured a young man who had enlisted to support his family, only to lose his life weeks before returning home. Another display highlighted the struggles of veterans who faced PTSD after their service, their battles often invisible to those around them. Amber's steps faltered as she reached a corner dedicated to soldiers who had died by suicide. A framed photo of her father stared back at her, alongside a brief biography and a note about his dedication to his fellow soldiers. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. For years, Amber had buried her grief under layers of anger and activism. Seeing her father's name, his face, and his story laid bare for the world to see broke something inside her. She clutched the photograph, her sobs echoing in the quiet space. Amber sat in her car outside the diner, the engine idling. The thought of walking inside to meet James was almost too much to bear. She gripped the steering wheel, her chest tight with nerves. For days, she had debated reaching out to him, torn between her guilt and the fear of rejection. But Maria's letter, combined with her father's memorial display, had left her with no choice. She needed to face the man she had publicly vilified. Inside, James sat in a corner booth, his hands clasped around a cup of coffee. When Amber walked in, he looked up, his expression unreadable. She approached slowly, feeling the weight of every step. "Thank you for meeting me," she said quietly as she slid into the seat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was thick with tension. Finally, Amber broke it, her voice trembling. "I want to apologize for everything. For what happened at the memorial, and for how I've treated you since. I was wrong." James studied her face, his weathered features softening. "Why now?" he asked. Amber hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Because I've been running from my own pain for too long. My father was a veteran. He served 2 tours and came back different. He struggled with PTSD for years before Her voice cracked, and she looked away, tears welling in her eyes. James leaned forward, his tone gentler now. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. "But why attack the people who understand that pain the most?" Amber wiped her eyes and met his gaze. "I thought I was fighting for change, for something bigger than myself. But it wasn't just about that. I was angry at the system that failed my father, angry at the silence around what he went through. I thought blaming people like you would make it easier. It didn't." James nodded slowly, his own memories surfacing. "My brother Michael came back from the war with scars no one could see. He never let on how much he was struggling, even in his final letter to me. Losing him, it changed everything. For the first time, the two of them found common ground in their shared grief. They spoke for hours, exchanging stories of their loved ones, their pain, and their hopes for healing. By the end of the conversation, James extended a tentative olive branch. "If you're serious about making amends, there's something you can do," he said. The next day, Amber called a meeting with her group. "I'm going to the memorial event," she announced. The room erupted in protest. "You can't be serious," Derek shouted. "They'll use this to humiliate you. And us." Amber stood her ground. "This isn't about us anymore. It's about making things right." Her decision to attend the event sent shockwaves through the town. Social media lit up with speculation and outrage. Some veterans accused her of trying to hijack the event for publicity, while her own supporters labeled her a traitor. The tension grew as rumors spread about planned disruptions from both sides. Undeterred, James threw himself into organizing the memorial event, enlisting Maria, Emily, and other veterans to help. The goal was clear: to create a space for unity and healing. They planned speeches, a candlelight vigil, and a tribute to soldiers who had struggled with PTSD. Emily even created a video montage of stories from local veterans, hoping to remind everyone of the human cost of war. The day of the event arrived, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Hundreds of people gathered at the memorial, their emotions running high. Veterans in uniform stood side by side with grieving families, while activists held signs promoting systemic change. The air buzzed with whispers and tension, everyone wondering if the event would erupt into chaos. Amber arrived alone, her steps hesitant as she approached the crowd. She felt dozens of eyes on her, some filled with disdain, others with curiosity. Her hands trembled as she made her way to the front, where James and Maria waited. Maria greeted her with a soft smile. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice kind but firm. Amber nodded, her throat tight. As the event began, she stood to the side, listening to the speeches and watching the crowd. The stories shared were raw and heart-wrenching, painting a vivid picture of sacrifice, loss, and resilience. Finally, James took the microphone. "Tonight is about healing," he said, his voice steady. "It's about honoring those we've lost and finding a way forward together. Someone here tonight has asked to speak, and I believe her words come from a place of genuine reflection." Amber stepped forward, her heart pounding. She took the microphone, her voice shaking as she began. "I know many of you don't want to hear from me, and I don't blame you. But I'm here because I need to say something that's long overdue. I was wrong. Wrong to disrupt your memorial. Wrong to dismiss your sacrifices. And wrong to let my pain turn into anger at the wrong people. She paused, scanning the crowd. My father was a veteran. He fought for this country, but when he came home, he fought battles no one could see. He didn't win those battles. I thought that by fighting against the system that failed him, I could honor his memory. But I let my anger blind me to the truth. That we're all hurting, and the only way to heal is together. Her words hung in the air, the crowd silent. Some faces softened. Others remained skeptical, but the tension began to ease. Amber continued, her voice gaining strength. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. I'm here to listen, to learn, and to help in any way I can. As she stepped back, Maria reached out and squeezed her hand. James nodded at her, a quiet acknowledgement of her courage. The crowd erupted into applause, not unanimous, but loud enough to signal the beginning of something new. Amber stood at the podium, her knees shaking as she looked out at the crowd. The flickering light of the memorial candles illuminated a sea of faces, some expectant, others skeptical, and a few openly hostile. She gripped the microphone, her heart pounding as she began to speak. I never imagined I'd be standing here, she said, her voice unsteady but growing stronger with each word. When I disrupted the original memorial, I thought I was making a statement. But the truth is I was running from my own pain, my own grief, and my own failures. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the crowd. My father was a soldier, a hero, like so many of you. But he didn't come home the same. He fought a war inside himself that no one could see, and in the end he lost. I've carried that pain for years, and instead of facing it, I let it fuel my anger. I'm sorry for the disrespect I showed, for the hurt I caused, and for not understanding the sacrifices you've made. Her voice broke, but she pushed through, locking eyes with Maria in the front row. I'm here to ask for forgiveness, and to honor my father by working to heal instead of divide. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a low murmur rippled through the crowd. Some veterans exchanged angry glances, their arms crossed in defiance. One man muttered loudly enough for others to hear. Words don't change what she did. Amber's stomach sank, but before the tension could escalate, Maria stepped forward. She walked slowly to the podium, her face calm but resolute. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around Amber in a firm, unyielding embrace. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd, but Maria didn't waver. I forgive you, Maria said softly, but her voice carried through the quiet night. Because this isn't just about us. It's about everyone we've lost and the future we want to build. The gesture of forgiveness broke through the crowd's defenses. One by one, people began to nod, their expressions softening. An older veteran in a wheelchair wheeled himself closer and raised a hand. She's right, he said. We've all made mistakes. The important thing is what we do next. Encouraged by Maria's example, others began to step forward to share their own stories. A young woman spoke about losing her brother in Afghanistan. An elderly man described his struggle with survivor's guilt after returning from Vietnam. The stories were raw and painful, but they brought the crowd together in a shared understanding of loss and resilience. Emily stood to the side, capturing the moments on her phone. She edited clips of the speeches and Maria's embrace, posting them with a caption. Healing begins when we choose understanding over anger. Within minutes, the videos began to spread online, garnering thousands of likes and shares. Amber watched the crowd with a mixture of relief and awe. For the first time in years, she felt the heavy weight of guilt begin to lift. She turned to James, who had been watching from a distance. Thank you, she said. James nodded, his expression thoughtful. You've got a long way to go, but this is a start. Amber hesitated, then said, I want to do more. I don't just want to apologize. I want to make things right. James considered her words. If you're serious about that, we've got a veterans outreach program that could use someone with your passion. It's not easy work, but it's important. Amber's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I'd like that. As the event continued, the atmosphere shifted from tension to unity. Attendees began leaving behind flowers, handwritten letters, and small mementos at the memorial, turning it into a living tribute to those who had served. Candles illuminated the growing collection, casting a warm, peaceful glow over the scene. Amber lingered at the memorial long after most of the crowd had dispersed. She knelt in front of the display dedicated to soldiers lost to suicide, gently placing her father's photograph among the tributes. "I hope this makes you proud," she whispered, her voice trembling. Nearby, Maria and James watched quietly. "I think tonight was about more than just the memorial," Maria said. "It was about proving that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal." James nodded, his gaze fixed on Amber. "And sometimes it takes the most unlikely person to start that process." In the days following the memorial event, the town seemed to exhale a collective breath it hadn't realized it was holding. Local news outlets ran stories highlighting the evening's emotional turn, calling it a moment of unexpected reconciliation. Footage of Maria embracing Amber played repeatedly on television and online, accompanied by headlines about healing and unity. The once divided community began to see hope in what had felt like an unbridgeable gap. James stood in the town's community center, now bustling with activity. What had once been a somber veterans outreach program was transforming into a vibrant hub of connection. "We've got volunteers from all walks of life," Emily said, her face glowing with pride. "This isn't just about veterans anymore. It's about everyone coming together to understand each other." James glanced at her, his expression warm but contemplative. "It's a good start, but there's more work to do. Let's use social media to reach beyond the town. If we can show people what we've done here, maybe it can inspire others." Emily nodded, already brainstorming ideas. She had learned firsthand the power of storytelling to change minds and spark dialogue. Over the following weeks, she poured her energy into creating videos and posts that showcased the outreach program's impact. One video featured James leading a workshop on bridging generational divides, while another highlighted veterans and young activists working side by side to organize community events. For Amber, the aftermath of the memorial brought a whirlwind of emotions. While some of her former supporters labeled her a traitor, others reached out with messages of support and encouragement. Among them was a letter from her estranged mother, who had seen Amber's speech and wanted to reconnect. Sitting across from her mother in a quiet cafe, Amber felt both nervous and hopeful. "I've made so many mistakes," Amber admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can fix everything." Her mother reached across the table, placing a hand over hers. "Your father would be proud of the steps you're taking now. It's never too late to start healing." Amber's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in years, she felt the possibility of rebuilding their relationship. Meanwhile, Maria had been inspired to take her own steps forward. Encouraged by the overwhelming response to her open letter, she started a support group for Gold Star families. At the group's first meeting, a small but diverse group of people gathered, each carrying their own stories of loss and resilience. "Sharing my story helped me feel less alone," Maria told them. "I want this to be a space where we can honor our loved ones and support each other through the hardest times." The group quickly became a source of strength for its members, and Maria found a renewed sense of purpose in helping others navigate their grief. As the weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of the memorial event continued to spread. Emily, reflecting on her journey, realized how much she had grown. "I used to think that being right was the most important thing," she told James one afternoon. "But now I see that understanding others, really listening, is what makes the biggest difference." James smiled, proud of the young woman she was becoming. "You've taught me a thing or two as well," he admitted. The outreach program flourished, drawing attention from neighboring towns and even a few national organizations. Amber became an active participant, using her platform to promote constructive dialogue and advocate for veterans' mental health resources. One crisp autumn morning, James found himself standing at his brother's grave. The cemetery was quiet, save for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. In his hands, he held a copy of the letter he had read at the memorial. "I hope you'd be proud of what we've done, Mike," James said softly. It's not perfect, but it's a start. He knelt and placed the letter against the headstone, a symbol of closure and a commitment to carry his brother's legacy forward. Rising to his feet, James felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years.